From the ashes of the Great War rose a conflict that reshaped the world. This is where history speaks, loud, raw, and unfiltered. Welcome to World War II Chronicles, where every story matters, every battle echoes, and every life remembered. Join us as we uncover the untold, revisit the decisive, and relive the global struggle that defined a generation. This is not just history. This is a chronicle of courage, conflict, and consequence.
April 1945. The vast Pacific Ocean churns beneath a fleet like none before it. Thousands of ships, tens of thousands of men, all moving toward a single island, Okinawa. Just 350 miles from Japan, this would be the last and bloodiest battle before the mainland itself. The fleet had come to stay. Aboard these vessels, soldiers and sailors prepare for the unknown. They check their weapons, tie their boots, and glance at letters from home. Some are veterans of Tarawa and Iwo Jima. Others are seeing combat for the first time. All of them know the cost may be high. As the fleet nears its target, the guns begin to thunder. Aircraft roar from carriers, sweeping the skies above. The sea is alive with motion, landing craft darting toward the beaches, cruisers and battleships laying down fire, men shouting orders over the wind and surf. The invasion has begun. But the defenders are ready. Unlike earlier campaigns, this is no surprise assault. Japanese forces on Okinawa are dug in, heavily armed, and determined to resist. And from above comes a new and terrifying threat, Kamikaze. These suicide pilots, sworn to die for the Emperor, dive toward the American ships with speed and fury. Steel screams through the sky. Explosions tear through decks. Sailors race to extinguish fires, to pull wounded shipmates from the wreckage. Each day brings new attacks. Each night brings the silence of loss. Ships are hit, sunk, burned. But the fleet endures. Gun crews remain at their posts. Damage control teams battle blazes and broken hulls. Medics tend to the wounded with shaking hands and steady hearts. The men of the fleet stand their ground. On land, Marines and Army infantry fight through hills and bunkers, caves and minefields. The resistance is fierce, the terrain unforgiving. Okinawa becomes a place of fire and ash, of sacrifice and survival. The fleet supports them without pause, delivering shells, supplies, and spirit. Weeks pass. Thousands fall. But the island is taken, inch by inch. Okinawa is secured, but at a terrible cost. The battle claimed over 12,000 American lives and wounded tens of thousands more. Japanese casualties soared even higher. Civilians, caught in the crossfire, suffered beyond words. Yet, the mission was achieved. The fleet came to stay, and it stayed until the very end. Their endurance, their bravery, and their sacrifice helped bring the war one step closer to conclusion. Today, the name Okinawa still echoes with meaning. It reminds us of the courage of those who faced relentless danger at sea and ashore. It reminds us of a generation that bore the weight of freedom on their shoulders. And it reminds us that history is not just made by orders and strategies, but by the resolve of ordinary men in extraordinary moments. The ocean was their highway, their battlefield, and for too many, their grave. As the sun rose over the Pacific in April 1945, the armada poised off Okinawa was unlike anything the world had seen. More than 1,500 warships and auxiliary vessels, 500,000 men in uniform, a floating city built for war. Aircraft carriers bristled with planes, battleships loomed like iron fortresses, and destroyers stood alert like sentinels. The mission, seize Okinawa and bring Japan within striking distance. Yet this was no simple invasion. Okinawa was the last, deadliest stronghold before the Japanese homeland. Its beaches were only the beginning. Hills riddled with tunnels, cliffs laced with machine guns, villages turned into death traps, this island would be defended to the last man. Japanese command had made it clear, there would be no retreat. For every inch, blood would be spilled. In the days before the landings, the fleet unleashed a thunderstorm of naval and aerial bombardments. Shells pounded the shoreline with ruthless precision. From the decks of the carriers, squadrons of fighters and bombers soared into the sky, striking airfields, fortifications, and supply lines. The might of American industry was on full display. Each ship, each plane, each bomb, the culmination of a nation mobilized for total war. But with the roar of firepower came the silence of waiting. Below decks, men played cards, wrote letters, and cleaned their rifles. They knew what was coming. Some gripped good luck charms. Others stared blankly into the sea. These were ordinary men from Iowa, Alabama, New York, mechanics, farmers, clerks, now transformed into warriors by necessity. Their lives balanced on the razor's edge of fate. When the first waves of landing craft pushed toward the beaches, they did so with a courage born not of fearlessness, but of resolve. From the ships above, every man watched and waited. The fleet was their lifeline, providing cover, reinforcements, and fire support. Battleships fired over their heads, clearing paths through barbed wire and pillboxes. Cruisers rained destruction on enemy positions. The men who steered these massive vessels and manned their guns fought a battle of endurance as much as firepower. Then came the storm from the sky. Kamikaze pilots, young men, barely out of school, soared from hidden airfields, flying straight into death. Strapped into aircraft packed with explosives, they hurled themselves at the fleet with a deadly resolve. They struck destroyers, carriers, supply ships, anywhere they could cause chaos. Some were shot down in a hail of flak, others struck their targets with devastating precision. Flames engulfed decks. Steel buckled. Men were thrown into the sea, screaming. Each kamikaze attack was more than an explosion, it was psychological warfare. Crews lived in constant alert. Even as they ate or rested, eyes were always skyward. Below deck, men slept in life jackets, knowing that any moment could be their last. Damage control teams became the heroes of the hour, sealing bulkheads, battling fires, rescuing the wounded. Medics treated burn victims with trembling hands. Chaplains prayed over lifeless forms shrouded in white. And yet, the fleet held. The sailors adapted. Gun crews learned to track the kamikaze's erratic flight paths. Radar teams scanned the skies without pause. Carrier pilots flew defensive patrols day and night. The sheer coordination required was staggering, a symphony of war played across miles of ocean. Every man, from the admiral on the bridge to the cook in the galley, became part of the machine of survival. Okinawa's shores were secured, but the interior was a different war altogether. Rain turned the ground to mud, hiding mines and corpses alike. Hills had to be taken one by one: Sugar Loaf, Shuri Ridge, Kakazu. The Japanese defenders emerged from caves like ghosts, striking and vanishing. Civilian casualties were immense. Whole families, caught between two armies, perished in the crossfire or by their own hands, the result of fear and propaganda. Still, the fleet stood as the backbone of the campaign. It brought food, water, medicine, ammunition. It evacuated the wounded. It delivered fresh troops and war correspondents who broadcast the grim truth back home. Ships became hospitals, repair yards, and command centers. Life aboard went on in the face of constant danger. Mail arrived in sacks. Radios played scratchy music from America. Men shaved, laughed, wept. By late June, Okinawa was declared secure. But the price was staggering: over 14,000 Americans dead and more than 36,000 wounded. The Japanese suffered even more, up to 100,000 military deaths and tens of thousands of civilian lives lost. For the fleet, it was the costliest naval campaign in US history. More than 30 ships were sunk, and hundreds damaged. The sea ran red with sacrifice. Yet the mission was achieved. Okinawa became the launchpad for what was to be the final assault on Japan. But in a twist of history, the horror of Okinawa helped shape a different ending. The ferocity of the resistance, the sheer scale of casualties, convinced American leaders that a direct invasion of the Japanese mainland would cost millions more lives. And so, in August 1945, the war ended not with a final battle, but with atomic fire and surrender. Today, the fleet that came to stay is remembered not just for its might, but for its endurance. For the brotherhood forged in steel and smoke. For the courage shown not in victory parades, but in the quiet moments, when a man kept fighting even when all seemed lost. We remember them not as numbers, but as names. As faces in grainy black and white film. As letters written in trembling hands. As voices lost to time, but not to memory. The fleet came to stay. And its legacy will never leave us. As the sun dipped below the horizon of Okinawa's jagged shoreline, shadows danced across the battered decks of the Allied fleet. These ships, scarred, scorched, and sagging from weeks of unrelenting war, did not retreat. They remained. Their mission wasn't only to fight, it was to anchor hope. To hold the line until the final chapter was written. In those final weeks of the Okinawa campaign, the fleet became more than a weapon. It was a floating city, a sanctuary, and a symbol. Men leaned against bulkheads staring into the sea, their eyes hollow from what they had seen. The smell of fuel, smoke, and salt hung thick in the air. Beneath the noise of machinery and distant gunfire was the silence of those who would never speak again. Some ships, like the USS Bunker Hill and USS Franklin, bore wounds so deep it was a miracle they floated. Kamikaze attacks had pierced their hearts, ignited their fuel, and torched their decks. Firefighting crews formed human chains. Brave souls dove into infernos to rescue others. Some gave their lives just trying to save a comrade. Their courage did not make headlines. But it made history. Sailors became gravediggers, medics, carpenters, poets. They buried their friends at sea, white-sheeted bodies sliding silently into the depths as a lone bugler played taps. Others wrote final letters for men who could no longer hold a pen. Some recorded their thoughts in journals, scrawled in grease-stained notebooks, haunting reflections that would one day become the only voices left of those who did not return. And still the fleet endured. Each sunrise brought new duties, repairs, supply drops, communications. The hum of warplanes overhead, the clanking of chains, the barked orders from the bridge, it all continued as if time itself had paused for this moment in the Pacific. And in this suspended reality, human resilience thrived. Pilots returned from missions with their planes riddled by flak, engines sputtering. Deck crews raced to refuel, reload, and repair, sometimes within minutes, sending them back out into the sky. Flight decks slick with oil and blood were mopped clean with urgency, not sentiment. There was always another sortie. Another wave coming. Below decks, the hum of generators mixed with prayers whispered in the dark. Letters from home were read and reread until they fell apart. Some men clipped photos of wives and sweethearts to the walls of their bunks, others carried snapshots in helmet liners, a glimpse of normalcy in a world consumed by fire. But the war would not wait. It pressed on, relentless, consuming. The Japanese, though cornered and outnumbered, fought with a fury that shocked even seasoned commanders. They sent waves of suicide boats, midget submarines, and gliders packed with bombs. At night, infiltrators swam toward anchored ships with explosives strapped to their bodies. And above them all, the kamikazes never stopped. Each attack reminded the fleet of its vulnerability. Steel could burn. Armor could rupture. Men could die, instantly, cruelly, without warning. Yet for every ship lost, 100 others pushed forward. New technologies emerged, radar-guided guns, proximity fuses, coordinated fighter intercepts, innovations born of necessity, fueled by desperation. And behind it all, a generation of young men rose to meet a challenge no training could fully prepare them for. These weren't mythical heroes. They were sons and brothers. Clerks. Bakers. Mechanics. And they became the shield of the Pacific. By late June, when organized resistance on Okinawa collapsed, the cost became clear. The island was littered with ruins. Entire hills had been reshaped by bombardment. Civilian shelters had become tombs. Some villages were erased from maps. The smell of death clung to the wind. Yet the fleet stayed. The war wasn't over. Okinawa was now the launch pad for Operation Downfall, the planned invasion of Japan itself. But among the ranks, something had shifted. Soldiers and sailors alike began to grasp the enormity of what a mainland invasion would mean. If Okinawa had cost so much, what would Tokyo cost? The answer would come not through more landings, but through the unthinkable, Hiroshima. Then Nagasaki. When news reached the fleet in August 1945 that Japan had surrendered, there was no eruption of cheers. Not at first. Just silence. Then, disbelief. Relief. And for many, tears. For friends lost. For pain endured. And for a war that had defined their youth. Soon, the fleet began a different kind of mission. Ships that once brought fire now carried food and medicine. Hospitals treated civilians. Crews disarmed mines and cleared shipping lanes. Occupation forces were landed. Japanese soldiers laid down their arms before the same men they once fought to the death. Peace, fragile and surreal, settled over the Pacific like morning mist. But for the fleet, for the sailors who had lived it, the memories would not fade. Even as their ships returned to American harbors months later, cheered by crowds and embraced by family, they carried the war within them. Some could never speak of it. Others could never stop. They built lives, raised children, worked in factories and schools. But at night, they remembered. The flash of explosions. The scream of diving planes. The salt on their lips. The faces of those they lost. And yet, they endured. The fleet that came to stay did more than win a battle. It preserved a way of life. It wrote a chapter of history not with ink, but with sacrifice. Today, few remain to tell the tale firsthand. The ships are gone, scrapped, sunk, or displayed as monuments. But their legacy survives. In museums and memorials. In textbooks and documentaries. In the freedom of nations once oppressed. And in every moment we reflect on what it means to serve, to sacrifice, and to endure. They were young men when they boarded those ships. Many never returned home. But those who did came back with stories etched into their souls. Stories of bravery. Of heartbreak. Of duty. And of a fleet that came to stay, and stayed until the very end. As the final waves lapped against the hulls and the guns at last fell silent, something changed in the rhythm of the sea. The echoes of war no longer thundered across the Pacific horizon, but in the hearts of those who had borne its weight, the silence spoke louder than bombs ever could. The men of the fleet stood on decks once torn by flame, staring at the waters that had taken so many and spared so few. Around them, the wreckage of a global conflict drifted like ghosts, sunken ambitions, shattered steel, and the memory of those who would never return. But they had stayed. Not for glory. Not for medals. They stayed because it was needed. Because someone had to hold the line when the world stood on the edge. This fleet, forged in fire, tempered by loss, became more than a force of war. It became a force of will. A testament to what unity, resolve, and sacrifice can endure. And as they turned their eyes homeward, they carried not just victory, but a legacy. History is not just a story of the past, it is a mirror to the present. If this journey through wartime Europe moved you, taught you, or made you reflect, consider subscribing to World War II Chronicles. Your likes and comments help us bring these forgotten moments back to life, and keep the voices of history from falling silent. Join the mission. Share your thoughts below. And stay with us as we uncover the untold chapters of the world's most defining conflict.